Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's my final thoughts for Week 12 of the NFL season over on Draftkings. It's actually kind of a mesh between my first look and final thoughts because we had to mix those together because we're a bit pressed for time because it's already Friday and we had two main slates, so you're going to have to bear with me there. But we're still going to be doing the lineup building video and the core plays video tomorrow, so you can be on the lookout for those. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me that around 50% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed, so if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you're new and you like what you see, consider hitting that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow, and it's obviously going to help me out as well. And we're really close to 7,000 subscribers, and that'd be really awesome if we could hit that soon. So without further ado, let's get right into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And it looks like we have two options this week, at least in my opinion, early on. I say early on, but it's Friday. But as of right now, it looks like we're either going to be spending all the way up for quarterback or we're going to be spending all the way down because there's not really a lot I like in the mid-range. Just going to depend on what kind of lineup build you like the most. If you want to make quarterback the key cog of your lineup or if you want to spend up a little bit more on the skill position players, I think both options are fine. But we'll start up top with Patrick Mahomes at $8,000. He's actually not the most expensive quarterback on this slate. It would be Kyler Murray. But I decided to go with Patrick Mahomes up top here just because we have a 56-point over-under in this game and only a 3.5-point spread. There's a lot of good fantasy options in this game. We have Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. On the flip side, we got Tom Brady, he's all right. Then you have Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown. You can throw in Gronk, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette. There's a ton of big names in this game. Now, I know both defenses actually are pretty solid, but there's just so much elite talent in this game that I think that'll prevail over the defenses. And we saw Tampa Bay last week kind of get shredded versus the Los Angeles Rams. And if the Rams can do that, I feel like a Patrick Mahomes-led offense can do that as well. He's kind of matchup proof, and there's just so much elite talent on that team. It's going to be pretty hard to stop him. So I could definitely see this turning into a shootout. Again, I know the defenses are pretty strong, but if there's anyone that's matchup proof, it's certainly Patrick Mahomes, averaging over 300 passing yards per game this season, close to 3 touchdowns. Now, the matchup versus Tampa Bay, like I said, it's not very good. They're first DFS versus the pass, and they're only allowing the 11 fewest points per game to the position. But it's going to be really hard to stop Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill, so I'm not really too concerned with the matchup here. Now, I feel like he's a better play in tournaments than he is in cash games just because of the massive price tag, and the matchup isn't very good. So he's a tournament play only for me, but if you want to go with, I feel like he's not going to be super high owned, so if you can get a decently low owned Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill stack or whatever you want to do, and then run it back with someone like Antonio Brown who's actually decently cheap, I don't hate that idea in tournaments this week. He just doesn't really feel that great of a cash game play. Now, speaking of cash game quarterbacks, I feel like Josh Allen's one of the top options on this slate. This is definitely a good game for fantasy purposes, and he's just a little bit cheaper than Patrick Mahomes, and he offers you a little bit more rushing upside as well. Now, this game's about 3 points lower at 53-point over-under compared to 56, and a 5-point spread, so it's a little bit more drastic. But still, this is going to be a good game for fantasy purposes. We have Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Kalen Ballage. There's quite a few good options in this game, so it's definitely one of the top games to target. And I feel like it's just a little bit more fantasy friendly than the one I just talked about, Kansas City and Tampa Bay. But definitely a lot of good options here, and Josh Allen's definitely having a great fantasy season. And I just like the rushing floor he gives us, averaging close to 30 rushing yards per game, which I know is nothing compared to Kyler Murray. He's got about double that, but still, that's not that bad. Over 5 rushing attempts per game and half a rushing touchdown per game as well. And the matchup's a little bit softer here compared to Patrick Mahomes. They're 15th DV versus the pass, Chargers that is, and they're allowing the 24th most, but they're 24th in terms of fantasy points given up per game to the quarterback position with over 21 fantasy points. So Josh Allen, I do think he's a very strong option on this slate versus the Chargers. Not the easiest defense in the world, but certainly haven't been that stingy versus quarterbacks, and he's just been a fun option for fantasy purposes all season long. And I definitely think the Josh Allen to Stephon Diggs combo is going to be quite popular this week. Then dropping down to the next quarterback in this game, he's a little bit cheaper. We have Justin Herbert at $7,200. The rookie has just been absolutely excellent this season. It's been a treat to watch for the most part. And like I said, I like this game for fantasy purposes. And if you need to save a little bit more money, Justin Herbert, I think he's still a fine option. He's a 5-point dog here on the road, so they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. And it's a pretty good matchup versus Buffalo. They have not been that good versus quarterbacks this year. Now, overall, they're a good pass defense, 14th DVOA. But when it comes to the quarterback position, they rank 28th, allowing over 22 Draftkings points per game. And they actually have been giving up a little bit of rushing yards as well. 24 rushing yards per game to quarterbacks and over half a rushing touchdown per game as well. And Justin Herbert has shown some ability as well, averaging over 20 rushing attempts per, I wish it was over 20 rushing attempts, over 20 rushing yards per game. So I think Herbert's a fine option here if you want to pair him up with Keenan Allen. I think that's one of the top options on the slate. Now, it is quite expensive because I believe Keenan Allen is around $8,000, so you're not getting any discounts there. But still, Herbert to Keenan Allen should be a pretty solid option on this slate. And like I mentioned, this is a good game for fantasy purposes. Then after that, we kind of fall off a cliff to the quarterback. We actually kind of fall off a cliff here. And we have Matt Ryan and Derek Carr as the two cheap options that I think are the most interesting. So this should be a good game for fantasy purposes. It actually has a higher total than the last game we talked about. But both these defenses are just not good at all. And we have some decent fantasy options in this game. Now, Matt Ryan, he's $5,900. It's a good price tag, and it's obviously a fantastic matchup versus the Raiders. But it's going to completely depend on the Julio Jones news. If he doesn't play, Matt Ryan just turns into mush for the most part. If you look at his average points per game when Julio Jones is in versus when he's out, he's a completely different quarterback. So even if Calvin Ridley does play and Julio Jones is out, I just can't trust Matt Ryan to have a solid fantasy day if Julio Jones happens to miss this game. So he is fully dependent on the status of Julio Jones, and as of right now, we have no idea if he's going to play. So just keep that in mind, but it's a good matchup versus the Raiders. They're 19th DVA versus the pass, and they're 27th versus quarterback, so it's obviously a good matchup, but we just have to keep our eyes and ears peeled for some news on Julio. Then Derek Carr at $5,700, he should be the most popular cheap quarterback of the week, at least in my opinion he should be, because he gets a fantastic matchup versus Atlanta. We've definitely seen some good games from Derek Carr this season as well, and it's just they've been so bad versus quarterbacks. They're allowing the most points per game, close to 30 DraftKings points per game, over 300 passing yards per game, and they're 28th DVA versus the pass, and they also just allowed Taysom Hill to score 25 plus points versus them. Now I know it's because he was running the ball on them, and Derek Carr doesn't really have any rushing ability, but still overall this season they've been a team to target quarterbacks against, and I don't see why that trend's not going to continue. Now, he doesn't really have the best options in the world, but Nelson Aguilar's been a nice surprise this season, and you obviously have one of the best tight ends in football in Darren Waller. There's a couple of other guys that can surprise as well, like Henry Ruggs and Hunter Renfrow. So only $5,700 and the best matchup you can ask for a quarterback, and a 54-point over-under game in a dome where you don't have to worry about weather. I have a hard time seeing Derek Carr at least not be a safe cash game play to fit in all these studs at the running back and wide receiver position this week. Into the running back position, and to be honest, it's a pretty weak position, and it's kind of similar to last week where it looks like I'm just going to try to jam in Dalvin Cook because he is just far and away the best running back on this slate. It's also a very good matchup versus Carolina as well, and the Vikings maybe without Adam Thielen. I know he tested positive, but then he had a false test as well, so who knows what's going to happen there. If Adam Thielen's clear to play, it doesn't really change anything for Dalvin Cook. That more so affects Justin Jefferson. But if Thielen is out, it just makes more of a focal point on Dalvin Cook in the offense and Justin Jefferson. But they have a 27.5 implied team total here. They're 3.5-point favorites at home. The volume is going to be there every week. He's one of the best running backs in football. He has been awesome all season long. He's a capable pass-catching running back as well, and the matchup's pretty good. Carolina's 25th versus the run, and they're 28th versus running backs, allowing 27.8 DraftKings points per game and close to rushing touchdown per game as well, and over 6 catches per game. I know Dalvin Cook isn't a huge threat in the passing game, but over 3 targets per game and over a 13% target share. And if they need to use him through the air, which you might see an uptick in usage if Adam Thielen happens to be out, I just think he's such a good play. I know he's super expensive, but the rest of the running backs on these slate are not that great, so I feel like it's just a week to just jam in Dalvin Cook, especially in cash games. If you want to pivot off of him in tournaments and spend up for another wide receiver, I totally understand that, but in cash games, Dalvin Cook almost seems like a must-play here in my opinion, just because it's a tough position this week for sure. So after Dalvin, we need to find some RB2s and some RB3s, and James Robinson looks like the RB2 this week as of right now, in my opinion. If I can fit in both, I would love to do that, but Dalvin Cook's really it's going to make building lineups a little bit tough, especially at nearly $10,000, but I feel like we can make it work if we can find some value elsewhere. Might have to be at the wide receiver or tight end position or the quarterback position in defense. But James Robinson looks like a fine RB2 here just because of volume, and he's been good for fantasy purposes. He's been consistent all season long. They're playing at home, but they are 6.5-point underdogs, so maybe they'll have to abandon the run at some point. But the Browns' defense isn't really something I'm going to be too concerned about. Now, they are better versus the run than they are versus the pass. They're 18th DVA versus the run, which is not great, but they're allowing the 11th fewest points per game to the position and less than 80 rushing yards per game as well. But it's overall not a defense that's going to scare me too much, and he should see over 20 total touches in this game, and he feels just a bit cheap at $6,300, so I'm kind of in on him as my RB2. I know it's not the greatest spot in the world, but volume and the talent's been there for him, so I think he's fine at that price point. And then we're going to get into some more flex guys for the most part, but Kalen Ballage, I think you could use him as your RB2 as well. $5,800, I feel like he's still a little bit too cheap. He's going to be the feature back in this offense. and he should see 15 plus carries. But the thing I love the most about him in the past couple of weeks is he's really involved in the passing game. So last week, he actually had 9 targets and caught seven of them, only for 27 yards. But on a PPR site like DraftKings, that is absolutely amazing. And he also had 5 catches the week before that on 6 targets, and then 2 catches on 3 targets the week before that. So we should see around 20 total touches for him. And it's a pretty good matchup on the ground versus Buffalo. They're not the best rush defense in the world. 23rd DVOA versus the run, kind of more so mid-pack versus running backs, allowing 18th most points per game, which isn't like awful, but it's not that bad either for matchup wise. And they're allowing over 100 rushing yards per game and close to rushing touchdown per game as well. So Kalen Ballage should see 20 plus touches at less than $6,000, and that's not that bad. He's had a 21% target share in this offense, so I think he's a bit too cheap here. This should be a high scoring game. I like his chances of getting over 15 DraftKings points, which is not that bad at his price point. Kareem Hunt, $5,600. It's a good matchup versus Jacksonville. The only problem with him is that he's going to split snaps with Nick Chubb, but this is a team that loves to run the football, so I can see both those guys getting there. But the thing is, Kareem Hunt's about $2,000 cheaper, and he's going to be involved in the passing game as well. Meanwhile, Nick Chubb's not really involved at all in the passing game, so he's good for a handful of targets, which is good enough for me in a PPR site like DraftKings to be interested at only $5,600. He's also in and around the goal line a decent portion of the time as well. So we always have the touchdown upside. I know he had a down week last week versus the Eagles, but he kind of saved his day in that hurdle touchdown. But overall, he's been consistent this season. He's going to be involved in the offense. Jacksonville's not that good versus the run. They're 20th DVOA versus that, and they're allowing 27.4 DraftKings points per game to position, which is 27th in the league. Also kind of getting beat up through the air as well, allowing nearly 6.5 catches per game and close to 50 receiving yards per game as well, which kind of sets up well for Kareem Hunt. So I think both him and Nick Chubb should have some solid games, but we can get Kareem Hunt at a massive discount, so that makes me like him just a little bit more over Nick Chubb. Then Wayne Gallman at $5,000. I think he's fine as an RB3 on this slate. He finds himself in a good matchup versus Cincinnati. And I know he's not the greatest running back in the world, but he should see volume. That's really all I can ask for at that price point. And to be honest, since week 7, he's not been that bad because he's been scoring touchdowns every single week. Since week 7, he's had a touchdown in every single game. And he also had 2 touchdowns the last time they played in week 10. But 16.4 points in week 7, then 13, 14, and 19. I would take that all day at $5,000. It's also a good matchup versus Cincinnati. And they're 6-point favorites on the road. So this should set up well for Wayne Gallman. He's not really a big threat in the passing game, but we should see 15 to 20 touches for him. Now Cincinnati, they're 21st DVOA versus the run, which is pretty good, but they're kind of more so mid-pack in terms of fantasy points given up per game to the position, allowing the 15th fewest points per game, but still over 120 rushing yards per game, and I think Wayne Gallman's going to be fine at $5,000. So he's definitely a top candidate for your flex spot if you happen to go 3 running backs this week. Now, moving on to the wide receiver position, I'm not sure if we're going to afford one of these spend-up options, especially if we go with Dalvin Cook. If we can, great, but it's probably going to be one guy at max. But we'll start up top with Keenan Allen at $8,000, who's coming off an absolute monster game versus the Jets where he had around 40 DraftKings points. Now, I loved Keenan Allen heading to that week. I wasn't sure who was going to go stop him in the Jets secondary because they were down a couple of corners, and they were already dead last 32nd DVOA versus the pass, and he absolutely ate them up. He was targeted early and often, and it just kept happening all game long, and I was thankful the Jets actually kind of kept it close near the end of the game, so they kept throwing the ball, so it worked out perfect for Keenan Allen. His price did come up. I think he was $7,300 or $7,400 last week, so he's more expensive now, $8,000, but this is really where Keenan Allen should have been all season long. I remember we could get him around $6K earlier on in the season. I still wish that was the case. Unfortunately, it's not. But obviously, he's an elite option here versus Buffalo. It just comes with a massive price tag, but he gets over 10 targets per game, gets close to 10 catches per game, usually around 100 yards per game. You got to keep in mind, these numbers are including a game where he left the game early on versus New Orleans because he got hurt in the first quarter, so those numbers could be even higher. Still around a 30% target share. Now, the matchup versus Buffalo, they're 14th DVOA versus the pass, and they're kind of mid-pack versus wide receivers, allowing 35.4 points per game to the position, which is not like a cakewalk matchup, but I don't really care about matchups when it comes to Keenan Allen. The volume's going to be there. He's one of the best wide receivers in football. He's an elite route runner. He should be fine versus Buffalo, in which should be a high-scoring game, and they're 5-point dogs here, meaning they should be throwing the ball quite a bit. And Justin Herbert's throwing the ball around 40 times per game. So Keenan Allen, I have no concerns there, and this is definitely a great game to target for fantasy purposes. Then right below him, we have Tyreek Hill at $7,800. So I feel like he is just a tournament play only, even though he's been super consistent this season. Like, there's been there's been plenty of years where Tyreek Hill is very up and down, but so far this season he has one bad game, and it was actually versus Buffalo, the team we just talked about, where he had 5-point-something points, but outside of that, he's had double-digit points in every single game, and he's been heavily targeted in a lot of games as well, and he's obviously one of the best wide receivers in football. He can burn any single corner that he goes up against, and we just saw the Tampa Bay secondary get absolutely eaten alive by Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, so I feel like they can have success. I think Tyreek Hill can as well. Now, he's not as heavily targeted as guys like as Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs, those kind of guys. As you can see, 8.6 targets per game compared to Diggs at nearly 10 and Keenan Allen over 10. And the target share is only at 23% compared to 30% and 28%. But having a 23% target share from a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes and with Tyreek Hill's slight breaking upside, I definitely think that puts him in play for tournaments. And the Kansas City Chiefs also have the highest implied team total on the slate as well. So I don't really have too many concerns with Tyreek Hill. He just feels like a tournament play only, but he's got a massive wide receiver versus cornerback matchup advantage this week, according to PFF. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they are first DVA versus the pass, but they are kind of mid-pack versus wide receivers, 16th versus them, allowing close to 40 DraftKings points per game. So I think Tyreek Hill is going to be fine. If you're playing Patrick Mahomes, you're probably going to pair him up with Tyreek Hill. Then Stephon Diggs at 7,600. I feel like he might end up being the most owned wide receiver out of these big three guys, just because he's the most affordable, and I feel like Josh Allen's going to have the most is going to have the highest ownership between Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. So it's just going to make more sense that Stephon Diggs would be the highest owned because people want to pair up their wide receivers with their quarterbacks. But this is a good spot overall just because I like this game from a fantasy perspective. And they also have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate at 29, kind of right behind the Kansas City Chiefs. But the volume's there. He's one of the best wide receivers in football, close to a 30% target share, about 90 receiving yards per game. Kind of similar numbers to Keenan Allen. I don't think he's as good as Keenan Allen, but he's definitely a fantastic wide receiver. Now, it's not the best matchup in the world overall. I just think this is a good game environment. They're 15th DVA versus the pass, and they're actually allowing the 5th fewest points per game to the position. But Stephon Diggs is obviously a fine pairing with Josh Allen. Then getting more so into the mid-range, we have Justin Jefferson at $6,300. And if Adam Thielen happens to miss this game, he is one of my favorite plays on the slate because he's affordable. And Adam Thielen has around a 30% target share this season. So if you take that out of the equation, that's a lot of targets to redistribute in this lineup. And Justin Jefferson's already got over a 20% target share. So it would not surprise me if Adam Thielen happens to be out that we see close to it should be around a 30 to 40% target share for him in this game, because he's obviously sliding to the wide receiver 1 position. And so far this season, he's having a great year. He graded out super high over on PFF. He's averaging close to 0.6 fantasy points per route covered, which is actually higher than, or not route covered, per route ran, which is higher than Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. I know this isn't a team that likes to throw the football too much, so that can be a bit skewed, but overall, he's been very, very good this year. Now, the matchup versus the Panthers, they have been a bit stingy versus wide receivers, allowing the 8th fewest points per game, but overall, they're 24th DVA versus the pass, so I think Justin Jefferson would become an absolutely elite option as long as Adam Thielen happens to be out. If Thielen is in, he's still viable. It's just not as nearly a slam dunk play if Adam Thielen happens to be out. So it's another thing we're going to have to keep our eyes and ears peeled for to see the news on Adam Thielen. Hopefully we can get that soon, though. Then dropping down from Jefferson, we have Devontae Parker at $1,500 in a really good matchup versus the Jets. Now, he's not obviously as good as Keenan Allen, so I'm not expecting him to put up 40 DraftKings points, and Tua is obviously not as good as Justin Herbert, at least in my opinion. I think that's everyone's opinion. But Parker's the wide receiver 1 in this team, and it's a great matchup versus the Jets. He should be able to eat in this matchup, and the Jets are 32nd DVA versus the pass, and they're 29th versus wide receivers, allowing close to 44 DraftKings points per game, and over 200 receiving yards per game as well. So Parker, he should see close to 10 targets in this one, and at $1,500, it's a fantastic matchup, and I could see him having a pretty solid game. Robert Woods, $1,500. He's coming in hot after that game versus Tampa Bay. Absolutely crushed in that one, him and Cooper Kupp. And I say this every week. I feel like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are the exact same play, but Robert Woods tends to be a little bit cheaper, so I'm always going to side with Robert Woods, and he's having a solid season so far. The numbers aren't fantastic. A 21% target share and about 7 targets per game. Hasn't absolutely balling out, but he's a safe option most weeks just because he's good for PPR, and this is a PPR site like DraftKings. Now, the matchup versus the 49ers, I wouldn't say it's amazing. They're 17th DVA versus the pass, which isn't bad, but they're only allowing the 11 fewest points per game to wide receivers. But at that price tag, only $1,500. And he did well in a much tougher matchup last week versus the Buccaneers. So I think Woods is fine just because of the price point. And if you need a cheap wide receiver, which you certainly might this week just because Dalvin Cook is super expensive, and if you want to fit an expensive quarterback and a guy like Allen, Hill, and Diggs, you might have to go dumpster diving a little bit. So Grant at $3,700. He gets the same matchup as Devontae Parker, obviously not the same corner, but overall it's a very soft matchup. And like I mentioned, they are dead last 32nd DVOA versus the pass, and they've been really bad versus wide receivers. So at 3,700, he should see a handful of targets. I think he is an interesting option given the price point. Then we'll move on to the tight end position. And up top, we have Travis Kelce at $7,000. Had the game-winning touchdown last week versus the Las Vegas Raiders. And he's obviously a super safe play each and every single week. The only problem is he comes in at a massive $7,000. So he doesn't typically fit optimal builds. And personally, I like to spend down at the tight end position, especially in cash games, to be able to afford more expensive running backs, quarterbacks, and wide receivers. So I can't really see myself going with Travis Kelce outside of pairing him up with Patrick Mahomes in tournaments. But even then, I do think he's a fine option. I could read you guys the numbers, but you guys get the idea. He's pretty much the best tight end in football. Kind of a toss-up there with George Kittle, but George Kittle is out. So as of right now, he is the best tight end in football, no questions asked. Darren Waller is a fine secondary option there, but he's certainly not on Travis Kelce's level. The matchup versus Tampa Bay, I wouldn't say it's great individually, but even then, Travis Kelce is matchup proof as it comes. And he's got a massive tight end versus linebacker advantage matchup per PFF this week. So, I mean, whatever. If you got the money for him, obviously a fine option. I just can't really see myself plugging in Travis Kelce in cash games this week. Darren Waller, he gets a fantastic matchup versus Atlanta, one of the most heavily targeted tight ends in football, kind of similar to Travis Kelce. Actually has a higher target share in his offense as well, but this is a team that likes to run the football for the most part. But we get a great matchup versus Atlanta, and they're actually allowing the most points for the tight end, 16.8 points per game, and they're 28 DVOA versus the pass, and close to receiving touchdown per game to the position as well. So Waller, he's kind of Derek Carr's wide receiver one in that team, so I think he's obviously a great option. He's at a $1,000 discount to Travis Kelce, so if you want to go with him over Kelce just on a point per dollar basis, I totally get that as well, and there should be a lot of points scored in this game too. And then getting into more of the cash game tight ends, just so we can spend down a little bit, we have Evan Ingram and Austin Hooper. Ingram finds himself in a really good matchup versus Cincinnati. They have not been good versus tight ends this year. They're 29th DVOA versus the pass, and they're allowing the fourth most points per game to the position. So Ingram, I think he's a pretty solid option, has over a 20% target share this season. I know this isn't the most exciting offense in the world, and his ADOT's only at 5.7. But he's a safe option at $4,500. Now, the touchdowns have not been there for Ingram, but he's obviously talented, and hopefully we can see some positive regression in that department as the season comes to a close. Then Hooper, $3,800. So he could have had a much better game than he had last week, but Baker Mayfield missed him absolutely wide open in the end zone on a crossing route in the back of the end zone. Like, there was no one even close to Austin Hooper, and Baker Mayfield just absolutely airmailed him one. So that sucked. Could have had a nice touchdown at a cheap price point. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but he gets another good spot here versus Jacksonville. He's still cheap. He has around a 20% target share in the season. And the matchup's good. They're 31st DVOA versus the pass, and they're also 26 versus tight ends, and they're allowing close to a touchdown per game. So he's pretty cheap at less than $4,000. Now, I would have Dallas Goedert here, but it sounds like Zach Ertz is going to be good to go for this game. That's just going to muddy the waters a little bit, so I was going to pass on Dallas Goedert there. But if you need to go cheap, Austin Hooper, I like that price point a lot. I could see him definitely being popular for cash games. Then the defenses, I don't really love talking about defenses, but for the most part, I try to pick decently sized favorites here. Hopefully they're at home, but if they're not, as long as the matchup's good, I think it's fine. The Dolphins are playing the Jets, so they're an obvious option there, only an 18.5 implied team total against them, and they're 7-point favorites. The Rams going up against the 49ers are 6.5-point favorites, missing some key pieces on their offense. The Giants are facing the Cincinnati Bengals without Joe Burrow. The Browns are facing Jacksonville. Mike Lennon's going to be the quarterback. I know they're on the road and they don't have the best defense in the world, but they're only 3,100, and they did show some upside last week. Now, unfortunately, they're going to be without Denzel Ward and Myles Garrett, so pretty much their two best defensive players. But we saw Olivier Vernon step up last week, and hopefully we can see something similar to that, although I can't expect them to score another touchdown. And then the Raiders defense at $2,300. If Julio Jones happens to be out, I know they're a bad defense, but Matt Ryan was so bad last week, and overall, he's just a much different quarterback when Julio Jones happens to be off the field. So if they're out, they're only $2,300, and that can certainly open up your lineup. And with that being said, guys, that's going to be at the end of the video, so I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. If you want to follow me over on social media, I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter, CPenn16 over on IG, and if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, which I know it's the end of the month, so you might want to wait until the 1st of December. But links down below for that. You can get access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet, all the projections, the cheat sheet, all the notes, and you can hop into the Discord chat as well. With that being said, guys, I'm going to get out of here. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend. Hopefully you got full on some turkey yesterday, some pumpkin pie, and all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next one.